video brought to you by NordVPN. J Balvin win Afro-Latino Artist of the Year 2021, which incensed many Latin folk them. Not only because, let's be real, man look like he been dodging sun from birth. Not only because he white enough to glow in the dark, that he whiter than bird, that he out here looking like the last Arctic monkey. No, it's also because the very year he was awarded Afro-Latino Artist of the Year, he dropped the music video for Peras. Now, trigger warning for misogynoir, sexism, and reggaeton so watered down that they could play it in Slam's Club.
A few therapy sessions later.
You ain't gonna believe this, right? But even though this came out in the year of our Lord, 2021, because if this came out in 2012, I wouldn't even blink, I ain't gonna lie. Even though J Balvin, bigger than Bad Bunny Balvin, even though he is one of the largest Latin American artists with the propellant of an entire music machinery behind him, yet no one person could have pulled Birch Tree Balvin, Blanco Bleach Balvin. Just tell him that, hey, maybe walking women, let alone historically marginalized black women, walking them on a leash ain't a good idea. The optics of it, it's a little off. I mean, they just had the whole BLM march, BLM, George Floyd and them. The market is having a moment. Put this one in the vault. Put this Pera song in the vault. No, nobody told him that. Despite all of that, what I am most intrigued at is how this happened with an Afro-Latina on the song. Play the damn song. Play the song. Yo soy una perra en calor. Literally translates to I am a in heat. Now I know adjacency to whiteness is the fentanyl of internalized bigotry. It is increasingly addicting and foundationally fatal. I understand this, right? But I can't help but admire the mountain of multiple systemic failures that facilitate a hiccup like this.
A lot of Dominicans will say they're not Black. It's obviously a lack of education and anti-Blackness.
No, I'm Latino, I'm this, I'm not Black, right? I don't want to be seen as those people.
Or maybe it wasn't a hiccup after all, but instead a sustained breath that has yet to be addressed. To the point where the Latin folks them that are darker than blue would insult their own hue if it means they gain some access to proximity
to whiteness, guarantees safety, right? When you think about the Dominican Republic, it's a negotiation between a lot of different regions, from Haiti to the United States to Europe. Its identity has been molded by white supremacy. And I say that to say it are the ones that suffer the most.
How can you tell a story that's been deprived of its origins and denied the ability to be told? This is the question posed by many Afro-Latinos to their own communities, where their ancestral narratives and cultural impact have been erased, minimized, or absolutely forgotten. Even the legitimacy of their presence and claim to their homelands are being questioned. They're being impugned.
I'm gonna admit something right here, right now. Most of my friends, they will exclude me. And then there were times they will even think I was lying about my parents' background. And I'm like, why would I lie about that? Don't get me wrong. There was a point, like especially in middle school, I used to lie about my parents' background because I always hated explaining to people why I'm Black, but my parents are from Honduras. I'm like, but yeah, so I used to lie. I used to be like, oh, I was Haitian, I was Jamaican. I would make up, instead of Black country, I would just mention it. I would be like, oh, I'm actually from Haiti. I'm actually from Jamaica. Most non-Black Latinos, when they think of someone who is Afro-Latino, they think someone who is mixed race.
Over time, Black heritage has been pushed to the margin of Latino discourse. But many Afro-Latinos have reclaimed their culture and emphatically risen to be a formidable collective. In 2005, the Southern Poverty Law Center headlined, "Tensions Mounting Between Blacks and Latinos Nationwide." They chronicled the growing violence between teenagers in Cali, Chicago, and even Nevada. In that year alone, in one case where hundreds of Black and Latino students got into separate battles in the streets around Wilma Amina Carter High School in Ratillo. 2 days later, there was another fight. And then 4 days after that, another unfortunately left 57 kids seriously injured. This article is only a speck in the sea of research papers, blogs, posts, articles, and tweets on the tensions and controversies between these two communities. So how can we resolve this? However, before we brainstorm solutions, there's an elephant in the room that needs to be addressed.
Like, what's a Latin person, right? That's one of my first responses. If you look at how anti-Blackness forms in Mexico, it's very different from how it forms in DR. It's very different from Argentina. Jeez, let me not get into Argentina. And in Brazil and in Colombia. Colombia is like the wildest, like separated place all over. Like, people think of Colombians and think of J Balvin, and it's like, what? Like, there's tons of indigenous groups in Colombia, right?
The reason why sometimes I struggle with being like Latina, though I'll say it, is because it encapsulates all of South America, Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean. Like, most of these people have nothing to do with each other except for like maybe a language. And even then it differs so much per like regions. Kind of one of those things that it's like, it's complicated because there's so much difference between all of these histories and all of the lived experiences of all these people in these regions. So it's like, even that, like, what does that mean? Sometimes I'll just say Caribbean because it's like, I think the region is very specific. And I think the Dominican Republic shares more culturally with other Caribbean islands than it does Chile, for example. Culturally, I share nothing with people from Chile, like, you know, aside from Spanish. And even then, I kind of don't understand. We don't understand each other very well. There's people that don't have a lot of melanin, but people through the lens of black and white want to identify as white. And it's like, this person is not white. Only white passing if you pass around white people.
We love to have people that look a certain way, usually European, J Balvin, or kind of mestizo, but they could lead to whiteness, aka Bad Bunny, Anuel, Daddy Yankee, Evie Queen. I could name a bunch of people. So it's like,
what exactly is the Latin community? Actually, no. Who is the Latin community? Because it definitely isn't a race. Of course, when we think about Latinos and what they look like, we typically think of mestizos, a colonial term from the era of Spanish conquistadors that describe people with a mix of white European and indigenous ancestry. Terms such as mulatto and mestizo are a remnant from slavery of both Africans and indigenous people in Latin America and the Caribbean. Well, trigger warning, rape and subsequent classification of the resulting children were necessary to establish a racial hierarchy. This caste system had an elaborate taxonomy, including Españoles, Creoles, Mestizos, Indios, Mulattos, Zambos, and Negroes, where mestizos outnumbered all groups and eventually became the core of many countries' national identity, now being used as a signifier for a colorblind society. But Latin simply means someone of Latin descent, or a person who speaks one of the Latin languages in the Americas. Haitians, Japanese, Colombians, and Afro-Brazilians are still Latin, even if they don't fit the narrow white supremacist box they're shoved into. Therein lies the primary problem. The Latino community embodies several different forms of in-betweens at once.
I'm Dominican. I got chino all the time. Sometimes I've got rubio, which literally means blonde, but there's actually just like a kind of way we say white boy.
I don't really outwardly identify myself as anything anymore. I let people identify me now. I'm just kind of like, dude, I really don't know at this point. I subscribe to the idea that it's like, if you have to question, is someone black, you're not black. But at the same time, as a Dominican person, people want to tell you, hey, by the way, just so you know, you're black. But it's like, yes, but also I think I'm mixed. But also my parents literally grew up on the same block. And my mom is very light-skinned and my dad's very dark-skinned. So I am but they're also both mixed. Everything is viewed through the lens of American identity politics and the language of that. And then in other places around the world, these conversations are very limited and underdeveloped because of where they are in their own history. So then it's not like you have like a different language or a different framework to like replace the conversation with. You're constantly having to mediate it through like the American like language, when in reality it doesn't fit in because it's a very different history. And every island has its own, every region has its own different history and relation to color, to texture, to hair. And it's a lot more complicated than people realize.
The term isn't racial, though it may conjure up ideas of a phenotype, but it's ethnic, which academics know gives off a softer mode of difference associated with earlier generations of immigrants from Europe and classified as white. The classification or desire to associate with the in-group of whiteness can easily be seen in blanqueamiento, branqueadura, or blanqueado la raza, which is a socioeconomic and political practice of upward social mobility by marrying lighter or white Latinos to literally whiten their race. However, the endless framing of Latinos versus Blacks perpetuate the exclusion of Afro-Latinos from Latinidad and whiteness as the ideal.
Middle school was a nightmare, I'm telling you right now. Like, middle school, hands down, the worst years of my life. The Afro-Latinos that were at this specific school, they were mixed race. So they would switch up and basically like side with the non-Black Latinos. There were times where certain non-Black Latinos would like treat me like crap. Like there were instances where they would bully me because of me being Black. They would talk bad about me in a negative way in Spanish, as if I'm not going to understand what they say about me.
This colonial psyop is a strategy used by the white ruling class every day, everywhere, to prevent racial and ethnic solidarity. So, for the sake of this video, I'll use Black and Latino to describe the two communities. But you all know we're talking about Black and mestizo relations, which also force Afro-Latinos to pick a side. Scholar Tanya Hernandez delves into the anti-Blackness in the Latino community as one answer to this framing, citing that her mother suffered violence, exclusion, and mistreatment by her family members, which is part of a much larger, insidious pattern of colorism that affects family ties, access to resources, educational opportunities, employment, and even the criminal justice system.
Like, the idea of you being of a higher class is parallel very much with like the idea of you being farther from Blackness. It's not it's not wearing Jordans, it's not wearing chains, it's not listening to this kind of music, it's not talking this kind of way. And that's all aside from like, it's not your phenotype as a person racially, or it's not like, you know, where you come from, things like that. It's very much a thing of like, Blackness is like a construct socially that represents a type of low class that people will be very discriminatory to. A lot of Dominicans are very cool with being Black, but they're not cool with being Haitian. They're very cool with being Black in a way that's cool in New York and that's cool in Miami and Cali. They'll be very cool with Snoop Dogg and they'll be very cool with like a lot of hip hop movements. It doesn't threaten them. It doesn't signify anything too crazy to them because it's detached. And it's from the US. So it's like, you know, it's still like this class-based import almost. But Haitianness, Haitianness is everything from like low class to like anti-patriotic, because our country is founded on hating Haitian people in a lot of ways.
Semantically, politically, governmentally, like based off of like census, to be Black is to be Haitian in Dominican Republic. Literally on the census, like Black is in parentheses Haitian. Old IDs, like my parents still have their IDs from when they lived there in the 90s. My mom says white and my dad says Indio, Indian. Is to say, and he's darker complexion. So it's to say he is of a darker complexion, but he's not Black because he's not Haitian. And I think a lot of people don't understand. It's not like the people themselves started saying like, we're not Black. It's like the entire country's history is a movement towards a separation from Haiti. Because when you look at Haiti being for it to defeat the world's most powerful army at the time, the French army, for a small slave nation to do that was such like a shock that everybody obviously, you know, did not want to trade with Haiti. Haiti to this day suffers from that. And it really sucks because a lot of, like, for example, Dominicans and a lot of people around the world will say things just like, oh, you know, these Haitians, they don't want to let go of like voodoo. They don't want to make money. They love being savages. They love being this. And it's a complete lack of like education over how all of the world's powers came forward to squash Haiti to the point where I think, what was it, like towards the late 1800s, 80% of Haiti's like national income was going back to France for the
reparations until the 60s, yeah.
The Dominican Republic, as soon as Haiti got its independence, was infiltrated by the United States. And they were thinking, how can we profit off of the resources there in general? Always, number one. Number two, how can we prevent what happened in Haiti from happening in the US and in the other colonies? Because it's not only that they didn't, that they got their freedom, it's also that they were just like, we are not doing plantation stuff anymore. Like, we are literally, like, there are no more plantations. Like, we are so over this. So they were made to pay. And there's literal, like, there's literal text written quotes from this time period from like the founding fathers, like Juan Pablo Duarte, who's one of the founding fathers of like the Dominican Republic, literally talking about how the Dominican Republic it was like a national project to have it be the widest and most Catholic island in the Caribbean. So that was a huge part of its foundation, broadcasting and branding the Dominican Republic as white and Catholic.
Many people may think that the idea of anti-Blackness in their own community is paradoxical. I mean, how can Latinos, which despite being an ethnic identifier known as people of color, be racist or prejudiced against Black people? It's impossible, right? However, Tanya posits that Latinos claim that their racially mixed culture immunized them from being racist, a term that she's dubbed Latino racial innocence. Colorism in the community is interwoven with the perception of phenotype, hair texture, the shape and size of your lips and nose, and even your family's socioeconomic standing.
There's even terminology for people that are white-skinned but have more African features. People dark-skinned but have like straight hair or something. And it's to say that there is this understanding of how color, not only color, but also texture of hair and also featureism are all the things that you're negotiating. So it kind of becomes this sort of like list of variables where it's like, okay, I was born with really kinky hair and I have a darker complexion, but my eyes are green and I could just realistically go to the salon. And through that, I move forward.
But for those in Hispaniola, however, the anti-Blackness and anti-Haitian sentiment runs deep in the Dominican Republic.
Dominican relation to anti-Blackness is not the same as any other like relation of other countries to anti-Blackness. If we want to talk about this, we should talk about why people end up this way. And for me, what I see is that ultimately it's just people's negotiation with oppression. It's people's negotiation of exploitation and oppression and what side they want to be on. And if you want to be not oppressed anymore, in our world, we present that the only option is to then become the oppressor. So people are going to take on whatever unsavory characteristics that they will, because if humans' objective is to survive and to make their people survive, and that's what's going to make you and your family survive, then nothing else matters.
Dominicans have a complicated relationship with race, and that's primarily due to the 30-year hate-filled reign of General Rafael Trujillo, who propagandized the association of Blackness with illegal immigration, criminality, primitivism, and Haitians rather than Dominicans. In fact, the militarization of the current Dominican-Haitian border is specifically due to the U.S. puppet dictator Trujillo and his anti-Haitianismo racism.
The U.S. occupation with they appointed Trujillo, who was a dictator in the Dominican Republic during the 1900s. If you know any elders that grew up during the Trujillo era, I think he was like assassinated like in 1960, I would say maybe late 1950s. I don't remember the specific date. If your parents or if your grandparents grew up during that time, like one of our home attendants grew up during the Trujillo era, She literally is like, oh my God, I'm getting too tan. I'm getting too dark. It was such intense, like genocide, literal. It was a dictatorship. So it was like so much of that was rooted in whiteness. So it was literally, it wasn't, it was about life or death, like legitimately life or death. That paired with intense, heavy corruption, it being one of the lowest educated countries in the world, being extremely Catholic. It's the only country that has the Bible on its flag. It's an extremely patriarchal country. It's very conservative. It has, I think, one of the highest rates of femicides, killing of women in the Caribbean. It's pretty easy to get away with killing your wife if she cheats on you there or whatever. Like, it's a very specific country. And that's why I say sometimes when Americans have a conversation around the Dominican Republic being anti-Black, I understand it with having it with other, like, New York Dominican people. They're just being, you know, assholes about it. That's fine. But like when you're talking about the people that live through that experience, that like deal with the literal consequences of anti-Blackness from not being able to get certain jobs unless their hair is straightened, or not being able to work in the front of an establishment if they're darker skinned, they have to work in the back. It's like they are the ones living through this. They just don't have the language to communicate this experience because this is their normal.
These negative stereotypes and anti-Blackness rife in the Black and Latino communities have only been furthered by state-sanctioned mass murders like the Parsley Massacre in Northwest Dominican Republic at the sole orders of Trujillo. Proximity to whiteness is another reason for anti-Blackness by those interested in upward social mobility at the expense of Afro-Latinos and other Black people. The white Cuban diaspora has repeatedly been charged with racial discrimination after successfully assimilating in a similar fashion to their Irish and Italian counterparts. Similarly, Tanya Hernandez argues in her book that the way South American Latinos racially bar Afro-Latinos from businesses and clubs distinctly mirror those of white people in the United States. In Puerto Rico, Hector Bermudez Zenon and his friends made headlines when they filed a discrimination claim due to being denied entrance to a San Juan restaurant while white patrons were right there immediately being seated and served. According to our research, Afro-Latino children are also given similar, if not harsher treatment to remind them of their place on the racial totem pole. Professors at a public school in NYC with a predominantly Dominican population reportedly treated darker-skinned students as less intelligent and more aggressive, thereby contributing to the school-to-prison pipeline. Across the United States, Black and Latino students face expulsion and discipline more often than white ones. With this knowledge in mind, and the history of anti-Blackness in the Latino community, why are we still fighting? Black Latinos and their cultural contributions are constantly erased in favor of mestizo artists, musicians, and actors who very rarely credit ancestors who paved the way and crafted these art forms. Because little did many know, the came from dancehall, a historically Jamaican genre. Let that sink in for a second. The very foundational rhythm that J Balvin's misogynoir music is bolstered by is Black in origin.
Dembow, which in itself is our adaptation of reggaeton and our adaptation of Jamaican, reggae and dance hall, and our adaptation of hip hop. A lot of anti-Haitianness is like the flavor that you get in DR. Reggaeton starts in Panama. It starts because of Caribbean immigrants in Panama, Jamaican immigrants in Panama that bring reggae there. And what emerges is this type of dancehall music that's set in Spanish. And from there, it comes to Puerto Rico in this kind of nebulous way, because there's some influence there, but there's also just a lot of influence in general of reggae and hip hop. Hip hop is huge in the US, and you get people that come back and forth between the US that are able to sort of like merge these things and bring the hot hip hop records, and then you get this thing. And then Dembow shows up, gets used over and over again in freestyles, and becomes this thing through which poor people in Puerto Rico, a lot of whom were, mestizo, a lot of them were light skinned. Like Daddy Yankee, he's he becomes this face, and there's a whole thing. Daddy Yankee and reggaeton is kind of like if you took Drake and he was also KRS-One at the same time. Like, it's a really weird thing. Reggaeton is this very political thing in Puerto Rico too. It was a rebellious music that often had like anti-cop messages, leftist messages in it. You know, Daddy Yankee was saying all that shit. Like, there was a lot of artists that were just like because police officers were the ones shutting down these parties, and there was this huge antagonism in Puerto Rico between the police and the poor.
The casual disrespect involved in placing the only Black people in such a position is just one example of a phenomenon we see again and again in the tension between Black folks and other POC. That tension being the reality that, though not at the top of the totem pole, other people of color can feel secure in the fact that they are at least not at the bottom. At least they're not Black. Hence the contrast marginalization of Blackness and the heavy veneration of whiteness. You see, the pernicious project of white supremacy has successfully generated a buffer between those at the top and those at the bottom. This manifests in ways overt and covert. And if it sounds familiar, it's because it is. It's a very similar situation like in my Asiaphobia in the Black community series with Olivia Sun that I highly recommend you watch. It's a highly topical topic given the talks of TikTok being banned, which reeks of xenophobia, the prejudice against Chinese people. Though, if you watch this video on TikTok, you would know that the security, amongst other things, are extremely compromised on the short form app. But there's a way you can protect yourselves. And that's with today's sponsor, NordVPN. The way I be second, Lord of mercy. With one click, you protected to the point that people trying to gain access to your most intimate details can't even figure out where in the world you are. Because NordVPN can put you anywhere in the world. Want to catch up on that stale, sardonic humor from the British folk them without having to book an overpriced ticket and learn how to speak turf? You can watch it from the comfort of your bed. But most of all, you get to keep these conversations going by supporting sponsors like NordVPN who support marginalized creators like me. And with my link, you get a bonus 4 months free with every 2-year plan. Not to mention, with Nord's risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee. So touch up the link in the description to get access to the fastest VPN on the planet that protects you too. NordVPN. And touch up these videos over here to understand more about this topic.